In November 1996, in a strip mall parking lot outside Charlotte, North Carolina, a small crowd stood waiting outside a store that did not look like a computer store at all. No shelves of boxed software, no wall of monitors stacked to the ceiling, just a handful of machines you could touch, and a clerk who would take your order and mail you the computer later, the same way the company had always sold it. That store belonged to Gateway, the computer company that had spent 11 years proving it did not need a store at all. It had built almost $10 billion in yearly sales by mailing computers to people who had never once seen one in person, shipped inside a black and white box designed to look like a Holstein cow. Customers trusted a company they had never visited more than they trusted the ones down the street. And on this particular afternoon, that same company opened the first of what would eventually become 268 physical stores, a decision that felt like nothing at the time and would end up being the one that mattered most. By the end of this video, you will see exactly why the thing that made Gateway impossible to compete with by mail became the thing that made it impossible to compete with in person. Gateway did not begin in an office. It began on a cattle ranch outside Sioux City, Iowa, in September 1985, when a 22-year-old named Ted Waitt and his friend Mike Hammond decided to sell computer parts by mail instead of getting real jobs. Waitt did not have money of his own. What he had was a grandmother named Mildred Smith, who put up her $15,000 savings certificate as collateral so the two of them could borrow $10,000 from a local bank. With that loan, they started a company called TIPC Network, selling add-on parts for Texas Instruments computers out of a farmhouse, taking orders over the phone and shipping them out from the barn. Within 6 months, they had booked $100,000 in sales, and Waitt's older brother Norman liked what he saw enough to buy half the company outright, becoming the financial adult in a business still being run out of a farm building. In 1987, they stopped selling add-ons and started building whole IBM-compatible computers themselves, priced far below what the big brands charged, mailed directly to the buyer's door. By 1988, in an office above a livestock exchange in downtown Sioux City, revenue hit $12 million. Within 2 more years, it was $275 million. Nobody in that town had ever seen a business grow like this, and almost nobody outside Iowa had heard of Gateway yet at all. What Gateway had figured out was not a better computer, it was a better kind of trust. Buying a computer in 1990 usually meant walking into a store and letting a salesman talk you into whatever he was paid to push that week. Gateway skipped the salesman and the store entirely, and it sold that absence as a feature. The company leaned hard into where it came from, running early advertisements that showed Ted Waitt's father's actual cattle herd next to the Sioux City water tower, asking readers, computers from Iowa. Then came the detail that made the whole thing unforgettable. Every machine shipped inside a plain white box covered in black spots, made to look exactly like a Holstein cow. Waitt would later say the spotted design was not even his idea. It came from a graphic designer, but the moment he saw it on a box, he knew it was right. He took it everywhere. Gateway did business afterward because it carried something with it that no advertisement could fake, an entire region's reputation for being plain, honest, and unpretentious, arriving on your porch. In January 1990, the company moved just across the state line to North Sioux City, South Dakota, chasing a tax advantage, and revenue kept climbing anyway. 1992 brought in $1.1 billion. In December 1993, Gateway went public on the New York Stock Exchange, raising more than $150 million, while Ted Waitt kept the overwhelming majority of the company for himself. By 1997, mailing cows' spotted boxes to people who had never set foot in a Gateway building anywhere, the company brought in $6.29 billion in a single year, and pocketed roughly $1 billion of it as pure profit. Then, in November 1996, Gateway opened its first 2 Gateway Country stores, one outside Charlotte and one outside New Haven, Connecticut. On paper, it looked harmless. These were not full retail stores in the traditional sense. There was no stock on the shelves, no computer you could carry out under your arm. You came in, you touched a machine, a salaried employee answered your questions, and then you placed your order exactly the way you always had, by phone or by mail, and Gateway shipped it to your house days later. It was billed internally as a showroom. a place to remove the last bit of doubt a buyer might feel about spending real money, sight unseen. And it worked, at least by the only measure anyone was watching. Within 2 years, there were more than 140 of these stores. By the end of the decade, there would be 268 of them scattered across the country. 1999 became the best year the company had ever had. $9.6 billion in revenue, $427.9 million in profit, almost 25,000 employees on the payroll worldwide, and better than 9% of the entire American computer market carrying the Gateway name. From the outside, the Cowbox company looked unstoppable, a mail-order farm business that had somehow outbuilt its own doubters twice over. Nobody was asking yet what all those buildings actually cost to keep open, because for the moment, the checks kept clearing, and nobody wanted to be the one who slowed it down. Here is the number nobody put on a slide back then. A catalog and a phone line cost almost nothing to run once they existed. A store costs rent, insurance, carpet, lighting, and a staffed employee standing there every single hour the doors are open, whether or not anyone walks in that day. Gateway had spent 11 years turning that absence of overhead into its entire competitive advantage over IBM and Compaq, both of whom still paid a small army of independent dealers to move boxes off shelves. Now Gateway was building its own version of exactly that expensive structure, one showroom at a time. At the precise moment, two things were happening at once. Michael Dell, running the same mail-order model Gateway had pioneered, was cutting prices harder and faster than anyone in the industry, squeezing the profit out of every machine sold. And the entire technology market was sliding toward the dot-com crash, dragging PC demand down with it. A thinner margin business, carrying a much heavier fixed cost than it had ever carried before, was about to meet a much smaller amount of revenue to spread that cost across. And here is the part most retellings of Gateway skip entirely, the detail that shows just how committed the company already was to this path. In the year 2000, with the personal computer market visibly falling apart around it, Gateway did not slow down on stores. It opened about 100 more of them. By the fourth quarter of 2000, the damage was no longer theoretical. Gateway posted a quarterly loss of $94 million, and its stock, which had traded near $80 a share not long before, collapsed toward $18. This is usually where a company story like this jumps straight to the bankruptcy filing. So if you have heard other versions of what happened to Gateway, stay with me, because the actual turn came from somewhere almost nobody expected. In 2001, Ted Waitt, who had stepped back to chairman 2 years earlier, walked back into the CEO's office himself and removed Jeff Whiteson, the executive he had personally installed to run the company day to day. Waitt then oversaw one of the harshest layoffs the computer industry had seen, cutting the workforce from 24,600 employees down to 14,000 in a single year, while the company still posted a net loss of just over $1 billion and watched revenue fall 38% to $5.94 billion. The founder had come back to save the company from a wound that, underneath all the market noise, traced straight back to a decision his own board had celebrated 5 years earlier as a sign of how far Gateway had come. It did not stop there. In 2002, sales fell again to $4.17 billion, and Gateway's share of the American computer market, more than 9% just 3 years earlier, dropped to 6.1%. Looking for anywhere else to grow, the company tried reinventing itself as a consumer electronics brand, selling its own plasma and flat-panel televisions at aggressive prices, positioning itself, in its own words, to be more like Apple. The sets failed at an alarming rate, their power boards burning out well before their time, and Gateway ended up facing a class action lawsuit from customers whose $4,000 televisions had died within a few years of purchase. It was the same instinct that built the store chain chase a bigger, fancier version of the brand, playing out again in miniature, with the same result. Then, in April 2003, Gateway admitted it had overstated its revenue by $476 million across 1999, 2000, and 2001. By November, the Securities and Exchange Commission had charged former CEO Jeff Whiteson, along with the company's former chief financial officer and controller, with fraud, accusing them of inflating numbers, specifically during the year the retail expansion was supposed to be paying off. That same year, 76 stores closed, another 1,900 jobs disappeared, and the once record-setting company posted a net loss of $514 million on revenue that had shrunk to $3.4 billion, less than half of what it earned at its 1999 peak just 4 years before. Then, in April 2004, weeks after Gateway agreed to absorb the budget PC maker eMachines in a deal built from cash and stock rather than cash alone, the company made the announcement that closed the loop this video opened with. Every single one of its 268 Gateway country stores would close. All of them, all at once, less than 8 years after the first two opened outside Charlotte and New Haven, promising nothing more than a place to look before you ordered by mail, exactly the way Gateway had always done it. It is worth sitting with the shape of that irony for a moment. A company that grew into a $9 billion business specifically because it never asked customers to walk into a building, spent 8 years and hundreds of millions of dollars building buildings, then tore the whole thing down in a single announcement and went back to selling through other people's stores instead. The cow-spotted box had never been a gimmick. It was a promise, a signal that a company you could not see and had never visited was still exactly who it claimed to be. Gateway country stores broke that promise without anyone at the company necessarily meaning to, simply by putting Gateway inside the same expensive game that Best Buy, CompUSA, and Dell's own retail partners were already playing, a game Gateway had never been built to win. Ted Waitt himself seemed to understand something like this once he was finally away from the company for good. He did not start another electronics brand, and he did not chase another version of Silicon Valley. He put his fortune into ocean conservation instead, funding marine protected areas across tens of millions of square kilometers of open water, choosing something that could not be branded or franchised, something whose value did not depend on convincing anyone of anything. Gateway sold the rest of itself to the Taiwanese computer maker Acer in 2007 for $710 million, a fraction of what the company had been worth at its peak, by which point barely 1,800 employees remained. Acer kept the name alive for a while as a budget label stitched onto machines built somewhere else, and in 2020, the Gateway brand briefly resurfaced again, this time on laptops sold through Walmart. The cow spots are mostly gone from memory now, a detail that shows up in nostalgia videos rather than store windows. But the lesson underneath the spots has not aged at all. The exact thing that makes a business trustworthy from a distance, its plainness, its lack of overhead, its refusal to perform anything, can quietly become a liability the moment that business tries to prove the same trust up close, in a building, with rent due every month, whether the crowd shows up or not. Gateway spent 11 years being believed without being seen. Then it spent 8 years and hundreds of millions of dollars trying to be seen, and it never fully recovered from the difference. If nobody ever told you the store chain, not the price war with Dell, was the real hinge this whole story turned on, that is exactly why this channel exists, to find the decision underneath the decision everyone already blames. If you want more stories like this, about empires that talk themselves into their own downfall, subscribe. There is a new one waiting every week. And if a cow-spotted box ever showed up on your porch, tell us in the comments what was inside it.